You can group in Fabian Moreau, you can group in Nick McLeod into this conversation. But to focus on Isaiah Hodgins, Dan, how many wide receivers get claimed to a team that they are not familiar with? And yes, I know he was with Brian Dable with the Bills, but still a team, a different environment, a different quarterback that he hasn't worked with, does not have a rapport with him. How many times do you see a wide receiver who is relatively unknown, a 6th-round pick out of Oregon State a couple years prior, come onto a team and then be one of the focal points of the offense? Not only one of the focal points of the offense, but help transform the offense from this stagnant 12 personnel. We're going to try to run the football and kick field goals. We don't have really the ability to create explosive plays. Our 11 personnel quick passing game is hit or miss. Transform that offense into a consistent 11 personnel approach that also assisted the running game. Because remember, the running game sucked in 12 personnel. Then it got efficient out of 11 personnel, the way defenses were playing the New York Giants. I think there was a sound and reasonable argument to be made. The impetus to that was Isaiah Hodgins. And I think a lot of that, and we brought this up before, and I've actually heard it referenced since we brought it up by somebody about the Detroit Lions game. The Detroit Lions game, the Giants were getting their asses kicked. They lined up like 90% in 11 personnel. Isaiah Hodgins went out there. It's not like he was overly productive in that game. I think he only had like 3 catches, but you're getting valuable reps in an offense that is a little bit foreign to you with Daniel Jones as your quarterback. During that game, remember what happened? Wan'Dale Robinson got injured. So that put even more pressure on Isaiah Hodgins to step up, along with Darius Slayton, because the wide receiver room was just getting decimated at that point. And Isaiah Hodgins seized the day. He full-on avenged sevenfold the entire situation and ended up taking this offense to a level that we did not necessarily believe it could reach. And that's something that we talked about all throughout the season. If you go back and listen to some of our old podcasts, we're like, look, we just want to see consistency from Daniel Jones and the passing attack. We're not seeing consistency. All we were doing was bitching about the Giants offense in Houston. We're like, yeah, Saquon Barkley had 36 touches, 35 carries against the Houston Texans, and they won. But how sustainable is that? It's not really all that sustainable in the modern NFL. But the presence of Isaiah Hodgins allowed Daniel Jones to flourish in an 11 personnel quick hitting offense led by Mike Kafka and Brian Dable. And I think just Joe Schoen identifying that this player has that type of potential was one of the more excellent moves that we've seen from this general manager.
Yeah, you nailed this one. This one, for me, claiming Isaiah Hodgins is number 2 on my list. And if there wasn't a far and away runaway pick for number 1, this would be number 1 for me. It's definitely a teardrop between this and 3 and even 4 and 5. To me, this is where he differentiates himself as the GM. And I do appreciate the claims of like Nick McLeod and all those other players. I don't follow 32 other teams, Nick, but I do get the feeling there are some more claims like McLeod's out there. It's hard to say, but I don't think there's many kinds of claims like Isaiah Hodgins that go down in a single season, let alone, like, if you really looked at it, few years. You probably have to go every few years to find somebody who makes that kind of impact right away after being claimed at a position where, yes, you mentioned he played in Buffalo. He kind of knew what Dable was all about, but it's not the same system. Brian Dable's working with Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka has some of his own concepts involved in this offense. Even the terminology is probably different. And most importantly than any of that, the quarterback's different. He had to build his rapport with Daniel Jones, and we know how important rapport is for a quarterback and wide receiver and for an NFL passing game. He had to build that from scratch within days to then get on the field, like you mentioned. And like you said, he wasn't all that productive, but he was kind of, when you look at the routes he ran and how he got open. And they knew it right away, too, the Giants, because right away they started to design plays to get him the football. And right away you saw with Isaiah Hodgins, the rapport build with Daniel Jones just snap like that. Isaiah Hodgins, I think, had an 84% catch percent. That's on targetable catches around him. And he didn't drop an actual pass on the season. Scored a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. I felt like he really developed in the red zone as a receiver. His timing with Daniel Jones was excellent there. It felt like on scramble drills where Jones would climb the pocket and move to his right laterally, Isaiah Hodgins knew exactly where to go to get open. It felt like on those quick whip routes, he did a great job of using his footwork, his head fakes to get open. I'm even thinking of like the 10 to 15 yards quick hitting range, Nick, that intermediate range. I don't know if there was a single receiver on the Giants all season long, including the guys who got to play with Jones in August throughout training camp and get reps down in September and October and whatever, who had better timing with Daniel Jones than Isaiah Hodgins. You look at some of those intermediate in-breaking routes. Someone posted one recently just discussing Isaiah Hodgins, a fantasy guy. Shout out to, I forget who it was on Twitter. I retweeted you with a quote tweet, and it was just a quick in-breaking route in intermediate range. And Isaiah Hodgins did such a good job of setting up the route with his feet, like we always see him, with his head shakes, and then getting open to catch the football. That chemistry he developed with Jones in such a short period of time shows me how special he could potentially be as a player. Obviously, those who listen to this know how high we are in him. and how important and great of a move that was by Joe Schoen. So to me, claiming Isaiah Hodgins, just something you don't see and something I don't even remember. I'm not even sure the Giants made a claim like this ever in my history as a fan. Chase Blackburn, I know they once picked him off the streets and he played for them again, or maybe it wasn't Blackburn. I forget who it was who like had a nice second run with the Giants. They've done it might have been Blackburn. Yeah. I can't think of too many other moves though, especially at a position like receiver where again, it does matter so much if you're on the same page and the timing is right. So this was just a knock it out move. And yes, he had a little bit of a edge because he worked in Buffalo, but that doesn't matter. Like he saw the opportunity. He's like, this dude is sitting on their practice squad and we're not going to let that happen anymore.
And it was a very wise move, but let's also put ourselves back in that time frame. What happened in Jacksonville a few weeks prior to Isaiah Hodgins arriving in New York? Daniel Bellinger, who was one of the more impactful players in the red zone, ends up getting punched in the eye essentially. And he misses, I think, all the way up until week 13, if I'm not mistaken. Isaiah Hodgins, when Daniel Bellinger was missing, ends up inserting himself into that lineup and becoming that reliable option. And then we saw, once Daniel Bellinger even returned, we saw Isaiah Hodgins kind of assume that role in the red zone. Remember the whip route that you referenced against Washington? That was Daniel Bellinger's first time back. And I don't know if Isaiah Hodgins gets those valuable reps in practice, maybe as one of the primary red zone targets if Daniel Bellinger is there. So with Isaiah Hodgins in general, just absolutely seizing the moment. Like the opportunity was gifted to him. There were a lot of injuries, but so many players receive that opportunity and then they flounder or they don't work hard enough for it. And Isaiah Hodgins was the exact opposite of that. Despite not being the fastest, like that's like the sexy trait that everybody thinks about that's synonymous with wide receivers, fast, quick, all those things. I would argue that Isaiah Hodgins for his size is quick, but he's not really fast, I guess you could say. But like we always say, man, and I don't want to be redundant here, but it's this. And this is the most important part. And for the ones listening on the podcast, I'm pointing to my brain. It's all about your smarts, your intelligence, and where you're going to be based on what the defense is doing. The defense does something different post snap. And the quarterback needs to be on the same page with the wide receiver. We've heard Joe Schoen say several times that is what they're looking for in wide receivers. And who embodies that more than Isaiah Hodgins on this roster?
Nobody, in my opinion, right now. I mean, maybe Sterling Shepard if he gets back on the field just because he developed such a good rapport with Jones over his career, and he's a smart player as well, but nobody right now that's healthy, and nobody, at least of the younger assets the Giants have. And what you just said is so important, but it's not really viewed as important, I feel like, across the NFL landscape with fans because it's hard to quantify and it's hard to understand. But I'm just going to give a recent example. I was listening to a podcast that George Kittle was on, and he discussed the different ways that Travis Kelce attacks defenses based on literally the most minutia of the coverages and how understanding he is of every single coverage and the depth that and Kittle was talking about the depth he runs his routes depending on those factors. And he said, the tight ends I've been around, not that many do that. I think he almost said like no one does that. And you think about it, like how has Travis Kelce been this dominant at the NFL level? He's not really like the biggest freak of nature. He's a freak. Obviously, they're all freaks. They're NFL players, and he's a bigger player. But he's not Rob Gronkowski. That's not the same kind of athlete, in my opinion, at all. And yet he is effectively a more effective receiver, I think, than Gronk. I still think Gronk is the best tight end of all time because of his blocking factor. But receiving wise, Kelce might be the best tight end of all time. And a big factor in that is the mental aspect that you went over with Hodgins. And I think that's what differentiates him. But there's other factors. He does a great job catching away from his frame. He doesn't drop passes. He catches the tough passes when you throw him into coverage. He does a really, really, really good job, in my opinion, of manipulating the sideline and understanding the spatial awareness around there. That's where he really reminds me the most of like an Amani Toomer type that we've had. So for me with Hodgins, I think that because he's not super fast, Nick, no one really cares about him. But those who are watching the tape are like, oh my God, this dude gets open all the time, catches everything in his vicinity, understands coverages, understands where to sit in zone, understands the red zone really well, which is like our biggest factor that's killed us over the years. And so all of that combined, this to me is the second best move Joe Schoen has made.
In terms of positioning and leverage, it's hard for me to find a receiver on this team that understands precisely where to be in terms of that and gives Daniel Jones the best chance of completing that pass. And these passes, they're like 6, 7, 8 yards, no yak type plays, not the sexiest thing in the world. Those are the types of plays that get you from 2nd and 10 to 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, or maybe a 3rd and 6 moves the chains. And those are the types of plays that end up resulting in touchdowns, resulting in 7 points, and resulting ultimately in wins.
Yeah, and sometimes those are the plays that lead to a 2nd and 2 where the Giants can then call something in the playbook they wouldn't be able to call on a 2nd and 10 if they didn't connect, or the receiver didn't find the space. It's like, when you're moving the offense the way they did at the end of that season, which is like you said, a lot of shotgun, 11 personnel, quick hitting, timing based offense, you need timing based receivers. And he is the number one timing based. I mean, Richie James did a good job of it as well. I just feel like his role in the offense was more tailored to success. I feel like he had a lot more of the layup routes. Isaiah Hodgins did it from the outside more often. I think he was 87% lined up on the outside. Like, it is a lot harder to win on the outside than in the slot. And Isaiah Hodgins did not blink at that, at that task.